Everybody, welcome to Pig Dr. Osborne's Brain. Got a great show for you today. We're going to be taking all of your toughest nutritional questions. But before we dive in, make sure you check out our sponsor. Just showed you one of our featured products this week, Hist-Assist. Right now, if you use the promo code SPRING, you'll save $8 on your bottle of Hist-Assist. Go check that out at Gluten Free Society. We'll put a link below as well. So if you're struggling with allergies right now, it's springtime, as many of you are, check it out. It's a fantastic product. Okay, let's dive into your questions. Let's see, Chris says, can you explain the difference between 25-OHD and the other way to measure it, please? If you're talking about 25-OHD and 125 vitamin D, those are two different types of blood tests. And generally when evaluating vitamin D in the blood, it's not a bad idea to have your doctor measure them both, whereas 25-OHD is kind of more of the accurate way to assess your vitamin D status. 125 vitamin D is a good way to help also to evaluate calcium and parathyroid hormone function, but it's not what we want to, it's not the measure that we want to accurately assess your vitamin D. So you can get them both measured, but if you are limited, if your doctor's not willing to run them both, the better one to look at if you're just trying to assess your vitamin D level is 25-OHD. Could you remind me of the magnesium you suggest for sleeping? And can you tell me if there are any side effects with other medications and eventually sleep aid side effects? Okay, so the simple answer is it's called Clear Mag. So if you're looking for a magnesium to support a good night's sleep, to support deep REM sleep and dreaming, Clear Mag. I'll put a link below for you. As far as side effects with other medications, no, magnesium is a pretty safe thing to take. Now that being said, you should always check your medicine and check with your doctor to make sure that he's not worried about potential side effects. Now, let me give you a couple of examples of where it's technically not side effects, but magnesium can actually enhance certain functions. So for example, if you have high blood pressure and you're taking blood pressure medication, and then you start taking magnesium, for some people, magnesium can actually help lower blood pressure. So if you're also on a blood pressure medication, what sometimes can happen is blood pressure starts to go too low, and that can make a person brain foggy and fatigued. So it's always good to work with somebody if you're not sure, especially if you're on multiple medications. But generally speaking, magnesium is safe to take as a supplement. And Clear Mag is the form of magnesium or the type of magnesium that is designed to help with sleep. And that's just because it's attached to an amino acid carrier that helps get it through the blood-brain barrier. So again, it enhances magnesium uptake to the brain. Well, I like this, just a comment. Gene says, love your collagen powder with my King coffee. Yeah, that's the way I prefer it too, Gene, is if I have a cup of coffee, I put it right in and makes it taste creamy and makes it taste good. Plus you get your collagen, so it's a twofer. Let's see here. Hi, are your products tested for glyphosate contamination? Yes, they are. We test for pesticides, heavy metals, and other toxins in all of our products. As a matter of fact, Laura, as the products come in, they've already been tested when they come into our warehouse. But then when they get to our warehouse, we actually test them again. So this just makes sure that our suppliers are staying honest with us. And sometimes we catch contamination of products as they come in, and we send them back. And that we do that twice so that we're protecting you, so that you can have faith, confidence, and trust in our products directly. Let's see, I'm using a CGM for type 1 diabetes, and they say to not use high doses of vitamin C. Not so much a question, but a comment. I'd say, some believe that taking more vitamin C will give you a false reading on if you're using a continuous glucose monitor, and it can give you an artificially, falsely elevated glucose. So you just have to keep that in mind, if you are using a CGM. Let's see here. what can you take for brain fog? Somebody, so one of our Instagram followers is asking, what can we take for brain fog? Well, if you're talking about, a supplement to support brain, good brain health, probably one of my favorite that I've seen work time and time again is choline. And this is because last estimate, I think it's 80 to 90% of the general population is deficient in choline. And choline helps produce something called acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is the primary nerve chemical that allows your brain cells to talk to each other. So one of my favorites is choline. We have something called ultracholine. We can put a link to that below here if you'd like. And it's a liquid. It's very easy to take. You take a couple of level teaspoons of that, mixed in about 3-4 ounces of water a day. And in my clinic, patients come back on a frequent basis and can't believe how much it impacted their brain fog and their clarity of thought. So that would be, if you're not doing any kind of testing and you just, shoot in the dark, stab in the dark, that would be one. The other would be B vitamins, just a good solid B vitamin complex. We have a gluten-free, grain-free B complex called B Complete. So those would be places to start, but ultimately, if you're still struggling after that, you really want to get some testing done to try to help you to determine why the brain fog is there. Is there a way to repair the damage done to memory after 5 decades of grain? I've been grain-free for 2 years and everything else is primarily great. It sounds like your memory's still an issue. Well, it's possible that you're missing some things. Like when we see somebody go grain-free and they're still struggling to overcome and they're still having certain types of symptoms, one of the next best steps in that process, when you've changed your diet and you're sleeping well and exercising, getting sunshine, drinking clean water, breathing clean air, is to get some testing done. One of the first tests that I would recommend is just getting another test that measures for food sensitivity. And I'm going to put a link up below this too for food sensitivity testing if your doctor won't order it. And it's important to order the right kind as well, because a lot of doctors will they'll do like skin prick tests or allergy tests for measuring something called IgE, and that is usually not the case when we're talking about chronic symptoms. It's usually what's called a delayed hypersensitivity response. And so we'll put that link up and you can read more about it. But that's something I would recommend that you do, because you could be getting in a food that's otherwise healthy, but for you is contributing to some low-grade persistent inflammation that's still impacting your ability for your brain to recover. Other things you might want to consider if we're talking about brain health and memory is, I just mentioned earlier with the other question on brain fog, choline and B vitamins. So taking some higher doses of those things might also be supportive in your situation. Let's see. I love this. Marcia says, Hist-Assist and ultra sinus support have kept my husband's seasonal allergies manageable. Day 12 of cough and congestion, but how long can this last? So if you're using Hist-Assist and ultra sinus support, I'm not quite sure I understand your question. It was day 12, because right now the pollen's still really, really high. You stay on Hist-Assist through the allergy season. It'll work as long as you're taking it. And if that's what you mean. Now, how long can the allergy season last? It just depends on how long the trees are pumping out all this pollen. But right now, you wake up in the morning and your car hood is turning yellow, right? And that's still happening at this point. So stay on it through allergy season, and you can also check the Weather Channel for pollen counts, and that might give you an indicator as well. But Marcia, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but the way it was worded, I'm not really 100% sure what you were asking. So if that didn't answer it, re-ask it in a different way for me, and I'll get it answered. Let's see here. Do you have any products that have ALA? Russ wants to know. Russ, if you're referring to alpha-lipoic acid, ALA, alpha-lipoic acid, yes. We have a premium R-form alpha-lipoic acid called Alpha Max. ALPHA-MAX, Alpha Max. You can check that out at Gluten Free Society. We could probably put a link down below for you. Is it true that magnesium deficiency can cause restless leg syndrome? It is, Dennis, but in my experience, what's more common a cause of restless legs is gut microbiome imbalance. So a lot of people that I see find that a good quality probiotic can help tremendously with restless leg syndrome. Kim says, I just want to say thank you. I've done gluten-free off and on for years, and it wasn't until I read your book that I went without any grains for a month, and it was definitely the ticket. I later tried gluten-free oats and started feeling crappy again, so now I'm back on the no grain, no pain train and winning. Love it. Thank you for sharing, Kim. Maybe somebody else will hear that who's celiac and doing it wrong and find some inspiration from your story. Dinah asks, what does high blood pressure have to do with gluten sensitivity? Lots. So gluten causes inflammation. And actually, most forms of high blood pressure are inflammation. High blood pressure is a consequence of inflammation. And generally, it's inflammation in the vascular lining. And so, gluten can do that. And there are a number of research studies that correlate gluten-free diets actually reducing blood pressure. I think we just did recently a pretty extensive piece on gluten and heart disease and high blood pressure. Maybe we can put that link up below for you to check out and share with your friend, Diana. If someone isn't gluten sensitive and has high blood pressure, what are other causes? Magnesium deficiency, calcium deficiency, B vitamin deficiency, lack of exercise, high processed MSG based diet, so they're eating a lot of processed foods. The person doesn't get adequate sleep, the person's under too much stress, the person doesn't have adequate quantities of other nutrients that also help regulate blood pressure. For one example would be protein. Protein is a major regulatory compound for blood pressure, particularly some of the amino acids like arginine and citrulline, which help to produce nitric oxide, which also helps vasodilate blood vessels and, again, regulates blood pressure. So lots and lots of different things. I think we did if my memory's right on this, I think we also did a crash course on blood pressure. You might go back and check that out and, again, share that and watch that because it may contain just a lot more information than what we have time to dive into today. Okay. Let's go down on the far left and also on the far right. I like Mary's comment here. She says, I'm grain-free since 2007, take a lot of supplements, but I have no pain. Just another story. She also says her psoriasis is gone. Fantastic. So for those of you who are watching this, maybe you're new, not sure what kind of benefits a grain-free diet can have, there's a couple of different stories you can hopefully take some motivation from. If you test for gluten sensitivity at age 60, was I always gluten sensitive or was I born with it or did I develop it later on in life? In essence, I think the question here is, are you born with gluten sensitivity? Yes, the answer is you are born with gluten sensitivity genes. So they're gene predispositions. If you have these genetic predispositions, you will react to gluten. Now, some people don't develop sickness from those gluten reactions until later in life, and here's why. The body's really, really good at healing. The body's really dynamic, and it can adapt. And even though gluten genetically, if you have the genes and you're genetically predisposed to reacting and creating inflammation against gluten, your body is going to buffer that for as long as it can. And when symptoms really start to set in, which for most people does come later in life, for women, usually it's the third, fourth decade. For men, it's usually the fifth decade of life where we really see the symptoms of disease start to manifest as a result of gluten exposure over long periods of time. This is why I'm a big advocate of genetic testing at birth, because it's non-invasive testing. Two, you can understand the dietary need of the human, of the person, without ever subjecting them to poison for decades before their body breaks down fundamentally where it can no longer protect them. So, genetic testing is what I recommend. Anyone who wants to know whether or not going gluten-free is a right move, do the genetic test. We'll put a link down below to genetic testing because that, I've seen cases where people, they'll get the blood tests or they'll get the biopsies and they come back negative for celiac disease, which again, gluten sensitivity and celiac disease are not the same thing. This is again another reason why I like genetic testing over the other kinds of tests. Let's go back to that question because there are something called gluten accelerators. So there are certain things that can make a person begin overreacting to gluten sooner rather than later. So like one of the known gluten accelerators is an antibiotic. Another one is proton pump inhibitors, which are, again, these are classes of medications that can just cause additional damage to the GI tract, making people more and more susceptible to reacting more aggressively to gluten. So we actually also have a video on gluten accelerators that you can watch and see if that ties into your experience as far as reacting to it when you were, as you were turning 60. Let's see here. My opinion on H2O2 therapy, I think it depends on why you're doing it and what you're doing it for. It's, I can't give a blanket opinion on it without knowing the actual reason as to why you would want to do it. Can toothpaste cause gum inflammation? Sarah's asking. Yes, absolutely it can. Interesting story. One time I had a patient who had severe gum bleeding. And the solution was from her dentist, who gave her a special toothpaste for sensitive gums. And anyway, when she started to use this toothpaste, her severe gum bleeding got even worse to the point where she would barely touch her gums and they would start bleeding. Well, when we tested her, she was actually allergic to two of the ingredients in her toothpaste. One of the ingredients was fluoride. So she had a fluoride allergy. She also had a fluoride toxicity. And then she was also allergic to something called sodium lauryl sulfate, or SLS. And so when we got rid of those toothpastes that contain those two items, the fluoride and the SLS, her gums quit bleeding. And it didn't take very long. It took about a week for her gums to recover from the aggressive blood loss. So to answer your question, yes, toothpaste can either be helpful or it can also be detrimental depending on, again, the ingredients and what a person uniquely might react to. Can you have the gluten sensitivity gene and not have celiac? Yes. It's what we call non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And there are non-celiac gluten sensitive genes or genetic markers. And this is why, again, it's important if you're not sure and you're trying to rely on celiac tests to determine whether you should go on a gluten-free diet, you might be misled, because if you're not celiac and your test comes back negative, it doesn't mean that you're not non-celiac gluten sensitive. So again, definitely they're different. Oxalates in potatoes. Okay, so the question is our vitamin C supplement bad for oxalate-sensitive individuals? Not really, where you have to, and it's not because the vitamin C that we have is derived from wild African organic potato. It's more because oxalates can be a byproduct of vitamin C, no matter the source of the vitamin C. So there's a biochemical pathway whereby you can make more oxalates with high doses of vitamin C. That's why some people that have recurring kidney stones don't do well with high doses of vitamin C, because it causes an increased frequency of calcium oxalate stones to form. Again, it's not the potato-based ingredient so much as it would be that the vitamin C itself can do that. So if you're oxalate prone, if you're prone to throwing off calcium oxalate stones, high doses of vitamin C might not be the best idea. Now, that's not true of all people either. I've had plenty of people in my practice who've had history of stones who do perfectly fine on higher dose C without having more stones. But again, it's not true universally across the board, but it's just something you should be cautious about if you are prone to stone formation. Is beef fat a good fat? Yes, it is, provided a couple of things, Pitt. Number one, the beef should be free-range grass-fed, because a cow that's pastured has a very, very different type of fat than a cow on a feedlot. When you put cows on feedlots, basically they're force-fed genetically modified grain that's doused in pesticides a few different times. So the cow's getting tons of pesticide and getting heavy ration of grain, which is not what cows are supposed to eat. Well, what that does, the pesticide damages the cow's microbiome and rumen. And that leads to, or can lead to, increased obesity in the cow. So the cow gets fatter. This is part of why they put cows on feedlots. It's to fatten them up so that they can get more money, because the more the cow weighs, the more you get for that cow at market. And the other reason why is consumers have gotten used to marbleized fat, especially the marbleized beef where you feed cows a lot of the sweeter grains. And so, you know, a lot of people like that taste or prefer that taste. So that's, you know, what they're used to. But good grass-fed, pasture-raised cows have fantastic fat that is rich in omega-3, rich in vitamin A, rich in with something called conjugated linoleic acid, which are all very, very helpful and beneficial and good for you. Despite the fact that it's saturated fat, there's kind of a myth out there that all saturated fat is bad, when the reality is not all saturated fat is bad at all. The type of saturated fat that isn't good for us is when we force feed animals food they're not supposed to eat, and that saturated fat in those animals isn't healthy, it's inflammatory. The other is when we force hydrogen into seed oils, okay, like corn oil, or you know, we take corn or soy oil and we make margarine or Crisco, that kind of thing. Those are hydrogenated fats, also sometimes referred to as trans fats, and those are unhealthy as all get out. So those things you would want to avoid. But true grass-fed, pasture-raised beef fat is very healthy for you, and you should seek out consuming it. It's good for you. It's got a lot of nutrients in it. If someone has two genes, if you're talking about gluten sensitivity genes, which I assume you are, if somebody has two gluten sensitivity genes, how likely is it for other siblings to have it? So it depends, because there's 4 different genetic alleles, Sarah, for gluten sensitivity. So there's 4 different alleles coming from 2 separate genes. So it depends on which 2 you have. But we can't, it's hard to determine what your siblings will have. We could determine what half of each of your parents have from your genes, but we really can't transfer laterally to your siblings with a great degree of accuracy. Now, there's a greater likelihood, let's say you have 2 positives, there's a greater likelihood that the same 2 positives you inherited from your parents also passed on to your siblings. So, I mean, there's definitely a greater likelihood, but we just can't get to that definitive information from, you know, one person's genetic information. Been using Ultra A, which is our vitamin A, at 1 drop a day for 11 months. Still had low vitamin A level. So Melanie, it depends on how your vitamin A was measured. But if it's still coming back low, you might consider increasing the dose from 1 drop a day to 2 drops a day. But if you're going to do that over a long period of time, I would recommend that you have your doctor monitor your liver enzymes and just make sure that, because vitamin A, when you take too high of a dose over time, vitamin A can start to show up as elevations in liver enzymes. So just make sure your doctor's monitoring that for you if you do increase your dose. And I would say don't increase it longer than 3 or 4 months if you're going to do that before you have your liver enzymes checked. I had a root canal removed last week and they found mercury. Tried to get it all out. It's a real predicament. Okay, so not a question, just more of a commentary. Yeah, I mean, if they found mercury as they were pulling out a root canal, Yeah, hopefully they pulled it out protecting you with dams and everything else so that you had minimal exposure. But if you're using Alpha Max and Ultra Metal Detox and liver detox as supplements to help your body support basically the detoxification of mercury, those are all good things. Keep doing that. So again, and then a follow-up to that is I'm taking antibiotics due to the surgery. What would be the best place to start on clearing the heavy metal? So again, it's always best to measure, when you're going into a heavy metal detox program, to have a starting point, like a starting objective point where you say, okay, my mercury is X, and then as you start using chelating agents, you remeasure over time. Usually what I do with people that come to work with me in my practice is we get a baseline, and then we do detoxification for 3 months. And the way we do that, Gene, is we cycle it. So we would use higher doses of ultra metal detox. Generally, we'd start around 6 to 8 capsules a day, but we'd only do it for 3 days in a row. So it's a cyclic process where you chelate. The process is called chelation. You chelate for 3 days, and then you give the body a break and you let the body recover for 11 days. So it's 3 days on, 11 days off. We usually start with 6 cycles like that, and then we recheck their mercury after the fact and make sure that it's either 1 coming down or 2 gone away. Now, if they give you antibiotics, you definitely want to be on a probiotic to help your microbiome support its recolonization as well. What are your thoughts on, let's see, go back up just a hair there. What are your thoughts on alkaline water pitcher compared to RO? It depends on how they're alkalinizing the water. I'm not a fan of hyperalkaline water. I mean, so part of it depends too on the pH. Water naturally doesn't have a pH of 9.5, and so what happens for a lot of people is they stay on super high pH water. Is it starts to affect their digestion. It starts to affect their stomach acid. So as a general rule of thumb, it just depends on the alkalinity level that you're getting from that pitcher. But water that has a pH of 7.5, 8 is plenty alkaline. And when you start going up over that, at least in my experience, you can start messing with the actual pH of the stomach, reducing the ability to absorb minerals and the ability to digest proteins. Let's see here. I took CBD oil for joint and muscle pain, but it didn't help. Any ideas why? So CBD is better, in my experience. It works better for nerve pain, so like neuropathy. And if you're experiencing more of a muscle joint pain, CBD may not be the best choice for you. I would suggest, if you're looking for something to support you, go back and watch my show. It was last week where we talked, actually it's Tuesday this week, we talked about pain, specifically joint and muscle pain, and strategies you could implement. But vitamin C mixed with quercetin would be a good place to start if you're trying to support it from a supplement perspective as well. If you're trying to go an extra mile, I would use something called white willow complex, which can be extremely effective. But at the end of the day, Christina, you still want to discover or understand why you're having pain. Because any supplement that you take can be supportive or helpful in that regard, and maybe and maybe not, like the CBD didn't help, but it won't necessarily solve for why you're having pain. So the number one question to ask is, why is the pain there? And so for a lot of people, the pain is there because their diet is inflammatory. So one of the things you might want to investigate is what you're eating. That's why I wrote No Grain, No Pain, right, is to help people who are having, chronic pain syndromes find a way out of that without drugs, without surgery, but with diet and lifestyle change. So if you haven't read it, you might want to go back and check that out and see if it works for you as well. Chronic sinus stuff all year long, always coughing stuff up. What could I do? Well, one thing you could try, Kyle, there's two different things you might try from a supplement support perspective, and one is called Ultra NAC, NAC, and the other is called Ultra Sinus Support. Both of those might help, but fundamentally speaking, why are you coughing stuff up? There could be a food that you're eating that's creating excessive mucus production, which is very, very common. And there could also be something in your house that could be causing, an air quality issue in your house. And so I've seen it in some homes, we see mold in the air ducts. And so the person living in that home has a lot of chronic upper respiratory mucus production, etc. I've also seen cases where the HVAC system was so dirty, just years of debris and dirt, and so every time the HVAC system kicks on, whether it's the heater or the air conditioner, that stuff starts blowing through your house, and then you're breathing that stuff in, and your lungs are reacting by producing mucus to protect you. So air quality also matters. You can try NAC, you can try ultrasinus support, but ultimately, you might want to have your air quality checked out. You might want to have your HVAC system in your home checked out and make sure it's clean and mold-free. And those would be good places to start as well. And then some people also, put an extra filter in. It's like an ultrafine HEPA filters, which are going to pull a lot of that debris out of your air and potentially improve your air quality in your house. Okay, so Barbara says, I would like to use omega-3 oils for inflammation, but heard that most are rancid. Your thoughts or suggestions? Yeah, that is a problem with a lot of over-the-counter fish oils, is that many of them are rancid. If you use one of ours, Barbara, you're not going to run into that problem. We actually have, with our products, we do testing, what's called decay testing, where we take our products when they come off the manufacturing line, we take them and we measure them, we test them, we make sure they're not rancid, we make sure that there's no chemicals and we make sure that the ingredients on the label are what are actually in the product. Then we put these products in a backstock room and we pull them at different intervals and we retest them. And we do this through the expiration date of the product. And what this does is this ensures that on the date of expiration of the product, if you're buying it from Gluten Free Society or Dr. Osborne, that product is not rancid and that product is just as viable as it was when it came off the shelf. So, you can feel confident if you're using like Ultra Omega or Omega Max from Gluten Free Society that is not the case. We also add antioxidants to our oils to make sure they don't decay, and that's something else that some people don't do, and this is one of the reasons why their products turn rancid. We also store our products so that they're light safe, because one of the things that causes omegas to deteriorate is light. The other thing that causes them to deteriorate is oxygen exposure. So we store them in dark bottles, but we also store them in dark capsules and we put antioxidants in the capsules to protect them. So we go through all these extra measures that many manufacturers don't go through because it's expensive to do those things. But what it does, that expense makes the product worth it because the product isn't rancid when you're trying to take it. Is it okay to eat salted macadamia nuts? Yeah, I'd say it depends on the salt that they're being salted with, but as a general rule of thumb, putting a little bit of salt on your nuts is not, is not anything that I think would be necessarily bad, provided the salt that you're using is a healthy form of salt. I'm not sure I understand this question. Do you feel chelation strips, vitamins, and minerals? You have to reword that maybe because I'm not sure what you mean by that. Feelings regarding hydrogen water. I think hydrogen water is more hype than benefit. That's not to say that some people haven't gotten benefit from it or that some people haven't experienced good things from it. But in my experience with it, it's not anything I would go through the extraneous cost of spending. Just my opinion. How does gluten damage the liver? Is it possible that the damage does not show itself in the lab test? Yes, both. So it's possible that your liver enzyme tests do not come back abnormally high. It's also possible that the damage is visible on an ultrasound. So Sarah, if you suspect liver damage and you're trying to rule it out, you can have your doctor run tests like AST and ALT, which are the two main liver enzymes that most doctors will test for, generally speaking. There's other tests, though. ALP, or alkaline phosphatase, is a test you can also run. You can also run a test called bilirubin. And bilirubin, there are two types of bilirubin. There's direct and indirect bilirubin. They should both be measured if you're trying to rule out or assess the liver damage. And then there's another marker that oftentimes means liver inflammation, and that marker is ferritin. So ferritin is very high. And so sometimes what will happen is the traditional ALT, AST will be normal, but ferritin will be really high. That's an indicator for liver damage. So it just depends on what your doctor's measuring and how comprehensive they're being in that measurement. But visually, you can see fat accumulation and inflammation on the liver through an ultrasound, which is a really good diagnostic tool for a doctor to use if they're trying to rule in or out possible problems in your liver. The reason I like a liver ultrasound is because it's not invasive and it's not going to expose you to the radiation, let's say, of a CAT scan, a CT scan, tons of radiation from a CT scan. I think it's like one CT scan is worth 1,000 X-rays of radiation. And so doctors really, really heavily rely on CT scans a lot of the time for their imaging. But I think, it's one of those areas where if we can do a different kind of imaging that doesn't hurt you with high doses of radiation, that's a better option. And in case of the liver ultrasound, definitely a test you can ask for. Okay, so a friend had been put on a ventilator 5 years ago after a surgery complication. It damaged the vocal cords, and he now has a very raspy voice. Is there anything he can take to get this to improve? Hard to say. Hard to say depending on the extent of the damage. There are a lot of things that a person could take to heal post-surgically. If I were just picking kind of top things to use, omega-3, vitamin C, and quercetin would be three that I would probably recommend highly. But I'd probably also recommend diet change, because a lot of times I see this so frequently where there's an assumption, right? Where somebody says, oh, your vocal cords were damaged because of the ventilator. And it's possible that, yeah, the ventilator did do that damage. I'm not going to say that isn't the case, but it's also possible that other things are damaging to the vocal cords that are happening simultaneously, that are preventing them from healing after the ventilator did the damage. And a classic example that I see all the time is people come to me and say, yeah, this damaged me or that damaged me, and then we change their diet. And one of the biggest diet changes, of course, is no grain, no pain. And then guess what happens? The thing that damaged them, that they thought was the cause of their permanent damage, goes away, right? And so now they're doing better, feeling better, healing and repairing, because they're no longer eating a food that continues to incite inflammation and prevents their body's ability to heal. So diet change, even beyond supplements, diet change would be something that I would strongly encourage you to urge your friend to look into. Is it okay to every day eat a bowl of fruit? How big's the bowl, Pitt? Because size matters, right? I mean, some people have bowls that are this big and some people have bowls that are this big. So how big is the bowl? I'd say if you're trying to quantify how much fruit you should eat, as a general rule of thumb, I recommend people stay under 2 servings of fruit a day. So that's 2 pieces of fruit. And so depending on your bowl size, I wouldn't go higher than that as a general course of action, unless you're aggressively working out and you just need more carbohydrate calories to sustain you. But the average person doesn't need that much fruit. Should you avoid taking zinc supplements in the same meal as beans due to phytic acid blocking mineral absorption? Yeah, I mean, now here's one way to get rid of some of that phytic acid, Evelyn, is if you pressure cook. First, soak your beans and drain them. So you soak them 12 hours and drain them, then you soak them 12 hours and you drain them. What's going to happen is those beans are going to start to sprout. Well, that process gets rid of a lot of the phytic acid. Then you pressure cook the beans, and that cooks them down even further. And so by the time you do those things, that your beans are going to be less apt to inhibit the absorption of that zinc. But if you're eating beans and they have any crunch to them at all, and I've seen that happen when people don't cook them long enough, yeah, it's not the best idea to take your zinc supplement with that food, because the compounds in beans, like phytic acid, can definitely bind zinc and prevent it from being absorbed to its best ability. Do I think that doing a detox using chelators to pull out heavy metals can also pull the good vitamins and minerals out of our bodies? Yes. More specifically, not the good vitamins, but more specifically, using chelators will pull out the good minerals. Chelators are not necessarily 100% specific for heavy metal. They also, contribute to the loss of minerals like calcium and magnesium and zinc. And so if you're doing a metal detox, it's important that you are taking extra mineral. When I put somebody on a metal detox, I always put them on mineral formulations in conjunction with that detox to make sure that we're not stripping their body away from the minerals as we're trying to get the metal out. Linda says, I watched the fatty liver series and have silver fillings. I can't afford to get them removed. So what can I do to reduce the damage? Linda, one of the things so silver fillings don't always have to come out. I know if you can afford to get them out, definitely do. But if your silver fillings are stable, they may not be as big of a problem as you think. And I see this a lot because of the nature of what we do in my practice is test. So when somebody comes in and we're worried about silver fillings being a source of mercury, before I can recommend they go see a dentist and have those removed, I first want to know whether or not they have high levels of mercury as a result. So the first thing we do is we test their mercury. And it's a lot cheaper to test your mercury first than to get those amalgams removed, because you'll spend thousands, depending on how many you have, you'll have thousands and thousands of dollars in amalgam removal bills. But you can, for a few $100s, you can get your mercury levels tested to see if you even need to bother with the amalgams. I've just seen cases where it wasn't necessary. So that could be your case, possible to say. What's my thought on meat produced in labs? Run as fast as you can in the opposite direction if you want to maintain your health. Lab-produced meats are going to be like every other major processed. Look at the history of the food industry. How many times have we been told by the food industry, hey, this really highly processed food is better for you than what Mother Nature made? Look at artificial sweeteners as an example. Look at hydrogenated fat, so like the trans oils that we were told, in the late 70s, really 60s, 70s, 80s, we were told, eat vegetable oil that's been hydrogenated, it's better for your heart. Now some states have banned it because it's so unheart healthy that it's responsible for a clogging of arteries. How many other examples could we come up with where, I think I did a show on that a few months ago, all the examples of how the government's and the marketers' advice on what we should be doing actually turned out to be wrong when enough people did it and we collected enough data to show this is nonsense. Anytime we talk about processed food, you're always better off running in the other direction because the track record on it, is poor. Now, if you're open to the thought of using these lab-created meats, my advice would be wait 10 years. Let us collect enough data to show that this stuff isn't healthy and isn't good for people and actually contributes to deterioration of health. And then if you're still comfortable with taking it, that's on you. But I always say anytime there's a new too good to be true plan that a marketer or a food company comes out with, and probably it is too good to be true. There's no shortcuts. And real health comes from hard work. It comes from eating the right food. It comes from preparing your own food, right? And we can't shortcut those things and expect that our bodies are not going to be shortcutted in our health. Let's see, Donna says, hi, from the UK. I'd love to be able to buy your products in the near future as I'm struggling to find a calcium supplement without additives. Yeah, we're working on that. I know I've been saying that for a while. COVID really delayed our ability to get international shipping and international logistics down. So just stay patient with us, Donna. I promise you we're still working on it, and once it's ready, we'll let you know. I have toenails that are discolored and look like they're not all the way connected at the nail bed. Could something be wrong with my liver? Yes, and it sounds that generally with that sounds like mold, Tony, like yeast possibly growing under the nail bed, dislocating the toe directly from the nail bed is a very common scenario. And so what happens with yeast, if you got yeast growing under your nail beds, you may also have yeast growing in your gut. And the problem with that is yeast ferments your food. So when you eat carbohydrates, the yeast that lives inside your GI tract converts that carbohydrate that you eat into alcohol, which then affects your liver. And so yeast is actually something that can damage the liver because of the alcohol exposure that you get from biochemistry. So think of it as when you have a yeast overgrowth in your gut, you basically have a wine factory in your gut. And even if you don't drink, you can be prone to the liver problems associated with that. What's a better supplement to take for asthma? I don't want to use an inhaler. How can I strengthen my lungs? Well, change your diet, because most people, asthma is an autoimmune condition. And so there are 4 triggers for autoimmune disease. Trigger number 1 is food. Trigger number 2 is chemical exposure. Trigger number 3 is nutritional deficit. And trigger number 4 is microbial imbalance. Have those things measured, Mary, because that's where the answer to strengthening your lungs is going to come from. I mean, any supplement that you want to take to support your lungs, from that situation is not going to solve the situation. But if you're saying, okay, if I say my top favorite to support lung is NAC, N-acetylcysteine. But again, you got to figure out what's triggering the asthma. Don't just expect N-acetylcysteine to be like the holy grail answer to that problem. Any thoughts about healing idiopathic neuropathy in your feet? A lot of thoughts, Bobby. We've talked in depth about neurological damage, numbness and tingling in the feet, and loss of sensation in the feet. You might check out some of our prior videos on neuropathy, but just vitamin B1, vitamin B12, folate, calcium, magnesium, alpha lipoic acid, monitoring your blood sugar to make sure that your carbohydrate intake doesn't go over 33% of your total calories, because a lot of people develop neuropathy as a result of excessive carbohydrate in their diet. This is why some people advocate for ketogenic diets. I'm not a fan of ketogenic diets, and definitely I think they have their place, but I like balance. But all those are thoughts about idiopathic. What they call idiopathic neuropathy means idiopathic means the doctor doesn't know. In my experience, idiopathic means there's always a cause. The doctor just didn't understand nutrition well enough to dive into the actual cause, and so instead recommended something like gabapentin to suppress symptoms without actually understanding why they existed. The best foods and vitamins for glaucoma. There's not like really a list of best foods, because that's a relative question. If you're talking about what's the best food for a person to take, it depends on the person. I mean, I've had people who, are allergic to broccoli and blueberries, for example, and beef, or I've had people who are allergic to other foods that we would all consider to be healthy, but for them it wasn't good. So I don't really like to get into the habit of just generalizing, do this diet for your glaucoma. I recommend testing. That's why we offer testing at Gluten Free Society, because this is one of the top questions we get. What's the best diet? Outside of no grain, no pain, which is my favorite diet. If we're talking about a generalized diet, if you want my generalized opinion about, what diet people should follow without any testing and without any in-depth research, it's no grain, no pain would be the diet. But as far as supplements and vitamins, we have a formula for eyes. It's called Focus, F-O-C-U-S. And you might check that out. It's got different ingredients that are crucial for eye health to support eye recovery and repair. Let's see. So follow-up question, I think, to the mercury question was, how do I test my levels for mercury? So best way to test for mercury would be ask for pre and post urine provocation testing. Pre-post urine provocation testing is the best way to go about looking to see whether or not you have high levels of mercury. I love this comment. Sarah says, your channel and your master class and books saved my life and gave me hope. Thank you for taking your time and answering our random questions. Sarah, you just made my day. Thank you for acknowledging the value in the show. I really appreciate that. How much NAC can you take per day? Safely, most people can take NAC, 1,000 milligrams, very safe, even up to 2,000 milligrams a day, very safely. But if you're going to take it long-term, indefinitely, ask your doctor to measure your homocysteine levels and make sure that, because NAC can, theoretically, I've never seen it be a really major clinical problem, but theoretically NAC, if we're talking about one of the possible side effects is that it might theoretically drive up homocysteine levels. So if you're not sure, have them check your homocysteine periodically and make sure you don't, you don't start seeing that elevate. Okay. How can I get, Mel, would you put a link up to Focus? I think the question was, what can I take for my eye? But I can't find the product, so if we could put that up for them on YouTube. And then, let's see, do we have anything left in the middle? Let's see here. Causes of fatty tumors and what you can do to reduce the size. If you're talking about lipomas, Terry, the biggest cause, in my experience, is when people have high carbohydrate diets, their body will convert carbohydrates into triglycerides, and then that triglyceride can store into a lipoma. So the first step is really get the diet under control. I have seen people get their diets under control, and I've seen lipomas shrink quite dramatically without having to have like a surgical removal. And I've also seen where people change their diet and it didn't reduce. So I've seen it go both ways. So but I would always start with diet change over surgery, especially if the lipoma is in an area where it's not really interfering with your function. Like if it was on the bottom of your foot and it was causing severe foot pain, maybe a different matter, although that's a pretty rare place for a lipoma. Usually lipomas occur in areas that tend to store more fat. So generally they occur in the shoulders and around the chest and the abdomen area for a lot of folks, and sometimes in the back. Do dentists still actually use mercury fillings? Interesting, Debbie. Good question. Yes, my son's a dentist, and he's been practicing now for a year. And when he was going, but I remember when he was going through dental school, they were still talking about silver amalgams and using silver amalgams, and which I found rather interesting, considering that the EPA considers the amount of mercury that goes into an amalgam to be a toxic biohazard for humans, yet we can put silver fillings in people and that's not considered a biohazard. But when dentists remove mercury fillings, there's a very specific protocol they have to follow based on EPA law to dispose of that mercury. They can't just flush it down the drain. If that tells you anything about how dangerous it actually is. But yeah, they still do use silver. I mean, the reason why silver is more, it's a better filling from a stability standpoint. It's a better filling than some of these other amalgam composites. And so, some dentists prefer to use them because of their stability. But, stability versus toxicity, I think if I were choosing today, I would choose a composite. But even more importantly, if I were choosing, I would say let's do good nutrition, and because I've seen cavities reverse. I mean, they can get bad enough where I would say no, that needs to be filled. But I have seen cases. I had a patient one time, 11 cavities. We spent a good year changing that person's diet and went back to the dentist. They didn't have any of their cavities filled prior, but went back to the dentist and the cavities were gone. So I I don't put myself in that camp of a cavity always has to be filled. I think part of it depends on the location of the cavity, the depth of the cavity, the risk to the patient. But diet change can dramatically affect the strength of your teeth, the hardness of your teeth, the enamel formation on your teeth. There's a number of research studies showing that, for example, gluten causes increased cavities. And you might also consider reading the work of Weston Price. He was a dentist, and he made huge gains in nutritional research on oral dentition and how people eat. Can taurine help if I have low stomach acid? It's only going to help if you have taurine deficiency, but just taking taurine, if you're not deficient, it's probably not going to help all that much, Jacqueline. I would say if you have low stomach acid, the easiest thing you could do is take a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar before you eat. That'll put a little bit of acid down in your stomach and help you digest your food. We also have a product called Ultra Acid, which is a mixture of betaine hydrochloride and gentian root and some other things that can help you with digesting. But at the end of the day, if you have low acid, just like I always say, the fundamental answer is, why do you have low acid? Is it that you've done or eaten foods that suppress your acid or damage your acid-producing cells? Or are you doing alkaline waters that suppress your acid? I mean, there are a lot of reasons why that could be the case, and that's what you'd want to ultimately dial that out. How do we get rid of the nail mold, the tummy mold? So probably one of the best ways to get rid of mold in the gut. What I use, well, I'm going to give you a generic answer. It's always better to do it in a custom fashion where you have some tests and you understand what to do accurately. But generally speaking, we have something called ultracaprylic acid, and we have something else called yeast shield. And so taking those two things together, along with, we have a type of probiotic called biotic defense with S. boulardii. And so taking those three supplements together will help to balance your flora in your gut. As far as the nails are concerned, if your gut's balanced, then you're less prone for the stuff to grow on your nails. But there are several things you can do. One of my favorite kind of home remedies for yeast under the nail beds is hydrogen peroxide soaks. So just soak the toenail in hydrogen peroxide. You just go to the drugstore and get that, they get that stuff in the brown bottle and soak for about 10 minutes. And then once you're done soaking it, and you can also take, essential oil. Thyme works really well. Citrus, any essential oil citrus like grapefruit or lemon or orange works really well. Rosemary works really well. And lacquer your nail in that oil, and also get some of that oil, try to get it, use a Q-tip and get some of that oil underneath the nail bed where that yeast is growing. And do that daily, for a couple of weeks. And what you'll start to see, or what a lot of times will happen, is that as the nail grows out, it'll start growing out healthy. And so you just trim back as it grows. You just keep trimming that nail back to remove the mold portion as it grows out. Let's see here. Let's go down on the left side. Can high levels of vitamin B6 supplements cause toxicity? Yeah, they can, and some people are more sensitive to that than others, but generally what happens is too much vitamin B6 can cause a neuropathy, and that can occur. A lot of times it occurs distally in the feet or in the hands. So if you're taking high levels of vitamin B6, yeah, you do want to be aware of that as a potential part of the problem, especially if you're doing it long term. Somebody mentioned that they had tried bone broth and it made them very sick. A lot of people want to use bone broth because You know, there's a lot of people talking about how bone broth is so great for leaky gut, but remember this, thick bone broth proteins for some people can cause a lot of gastric upset and irritation. So it's not right for everyone. And I would just say if you're trying bone broth and you just don't feel very well with it, listen to your body. Don't try to force it because you're hearing great things about it. Your body is trying to communicate with you. And remember, bone broth, some of the protein in bone broth for some people can be very hard to digest, so it can cause stomach pain and constipation. So it's not right for everyone. Let's see here. Can you use iodine for the nail yeast? You can. Iodine is, we use that a lot in our farm animals, Tony. We use a liquid povidone iodine for different kinds of scrapes, wounds, infections, yeast on the skin, you know, should it start to appear. So iodine's another thing, if you've got it, can work really, really well. When I was a kid growing up, they had a product. My parents always called it monkey blood, but what it was iodine, and you would apply it, you know, to cuts and scrapes to prevent infection. They use this a lot in surgical centers. It's that really reddish purple stuff that you see. They paint it on the skin, and then the skin kind of starts to turn yellow. That's iodine. What to do with the mucus which appears in the morning? What could be the reason for it if it's not allergy? Mold. A lot of people think mold allergy, but mold, it doesn't have to, you don't have to be allergic to mold for it to have a mold problem in your house and for that to lead to excessive mucus production, because mucus is a byproduct of your immune system trying to protect you from something in the environment. That's one of the reasons why people make excessive mucus. It's inside of that mucus that you're producing, there's antibodies, and so those antibodies are protective and help form a barrier. And so I see a lot of times where people have persistent morning mucus and they don't really have an allergy issue per se, that mold is part of their problem in their home. So I would, you know, maybe get your HVAC system checked for, you know, mold contamination, or have a mold inspector come out and do some testing to rule out mold. In my opinion, mold is I'll say it like this: mold is the next biggest epidemic that people are going to start discovering, and I mean mold in homes. It already is an epidemic. It's just that most people don't know about it. Most doctors aren't trained in it. They don't understand it very well. But we are going to hear more about this. Mold is where gluten was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you know, nobody had ever heard really of gluten sensitivity to speak of. It was kind of a rare esoteric thing. Today it's a household word, and you got gluten-free aisles in every grocery store across the nation. That's where mold's going to be in 20 years. The mold knowledge is going to be there in 20 years, but the way houses are being built today, infrastructures are being thrown up very quick, very hastily. They're not being properly built. They're being built by unskilled laborers, and so what's happening for a lot of people right now as we speak is mold death boxes are being put up and called homes. And I hate to sound so alarmist about it, because I don't really like to use fear in my message, but I just see it so much. Mold is probably, outside of gluten, mold is one of the top situations that we see for people that are struggling with chronic illness, and I've seen it get worse in the last 10 years, and I think part of that again is because of the cheap labor and the infrastructure going up too quickly and not being properly inspected at key moments during construction. Is it okay to eat risotto rice? No, not if you're trying to be grain-free. It's okay to eat wild rice, but not risotto. Thoughts on bathing with Epsom salts? Yeah, I like it, especially after a really tough workout and you're really sore. Magnesium soaks into the muscle. If you've had a really stressful week, end of the week, jumping on a magnesium bath can be very calmative and relaxing. Magnesium does absorb through the skin. from Epsom salt. There have been, I think, 1 or 2 studies that demonstrate that. And a lot of people say that that can't happen, but a couple of research studies have demonstrated that. And then anecdotally, we see people all the time who benefit tremendously from magnesium soaks. I think I answered this one. Somebody else asked it about recurring yeast. If you've got recurring yeast infections and you're losing weight, you really need to get in to see a good functional doc. Don't mess around. Recurring yeast is an indicator that you may have some immunosuppression. You know, the end stage of immunosuppression is cancer. That's why I say don't mess around with it. Get in and see somebody who can guide you a little bit more specifically. My GI doc says there's no such thing as a test for food sensitivity. I was lost as to what to say to him. I don't think there's anything you really need to say to him. If he's going to blatantly outright tell you something that isn't true, I don't think there's anything that you're going to be able to say to him that's going to change his mind. You know, there's a biblical quote. It's, you know, don't cast pearls before swine, and that's not to necessarily call your GI doc a pig, but at the end of the day, you're not going to convince somebody whose mind and heart are closed to knowledge. And, you know, my experience with most doctors who work kind of the conventional model, they're closed-minded. You don't believe diet has anything to do with anything. They don't believe that anything outside of the standard of what they're doing has any impact. They're so closed-minded that they've become the antithesis to science, because scientists should be the most open-minded people. We want to be proven right, or we want to be proven wrong. But the fact of the matter is we leave our minds and hearts open to being proven either way, and we're not dogmatic in our belief. I think the dogmatism leads to a religious-like component, and that's where we're at with medicine today. It's more a dogmatic religion than it is a scientific institution, and it's corrupt as hell. So don't bother wasting your time. My point, don't bother wasting your time trying to convince somebody who's not open to even being able to learn. Can mucus problem be, man, a lot of mucus. I mean, it must be allergy season, right? So can mucus problems be induced by the use of a CPAP machine? They can, and here's how, Helen. A lot of CPAP machines start growing mold in them. Or other bacteria. And so what happens if they're not properly sanitized and cleaned well, and this includes the tubes, I mean, you can get the mouthpiece, but there's other aspects to the machine, then you can get, you know, microbes growing in them that can contribute to an immune response. And so a lot of people, you have to be very cautious about the hygiene around your CPAP machine, is my point. So just, you know, that's where we'll see those potentially creating a problem. Okay, it's lunchtime. I'm going to go have some food. Hopefully this was a helpful session for you guys today. Again, don't forget our sponsor, Gluten-Free Society. Come visit us. If you're new to Dr. Osborne Show, go to glutenfreesociety.org. Sign up for our newsletter. I'll send you all kinds of free information, and make sure that you are knowledgeable and capable of navigating the right kind of diet to overcome autoimmunity. And we'll see you next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, and next Thursday, again, every Thursday, every Tuesday. Thursdays at 12:30, Tuesdays at 6 p.m. That's Central Time. We do our live shows. So we'll see you next Tuesday for